Good day and greetings from Pretoria, South Africa. My name is Dr. Charles Cotter. I'm the Learning Navigator, the Change Management and Leadership in a Crisis online learning program, part of the e-learning series. This is an on-demand learning program and comprises of 6 modules. Each of the registered learners will receive a SlideShare presentation per module, and then also a detailed workbook which comprises the content, but also a series of learning activities, which I'll expect you to complete at the end of each of these modules. I think this is probably the best way of continuing the engagement and also to stimulate discussion between the Learning Navigator and the registered learners. As a form of introduction, I'd like to give you a quick overview of my professional pedigree. Essentially, I've been in the field of education, training, development for the last 19 years. Of those 19, 15 as an independent contractor. I've been very privileged to have worked for over 140 different companies, both in the public and private sector. And of course, this stretches across 18 different countries and 4 different continents. My area of subject matter expertise is strategic management, change management, and also strategic human resources management. So let's move over to the second learning outcome of Module 3, and that is to start looking at resistance to change. I think it's something, especially during a time of crisis, that you'll be confronted with, you'll be extremely challenged with. And perhaps I could start off this session with a quote, and I think it's a bit of a reality check for a lot of us. All change meets resistance. I think that's a given. And the reality check is if there's no resistance, there's no change. So I think this speaks to the functional value of change. We shouldn't perceive and regard resistance to change as being dysfunctional behavior. It's sometimes healthy, it's sometimes constructive. You do need those devil's advocates in your team. You do need those people that challenge the motives and also the purpose, the why of the change. I think we said it earlier on, the research shows that the change management track record of success is not very constructive. As little as 30% of change management programs actually do achieve the change management objectives. So I think a lot of us tend to focus on the how and the what. And I think as a change leader, the key question is the why. And I think it's very important that you constantly, as a change leader, articulate the reasons for change. And sometimes this is the antidote to resistance to change. So the key questions that I'd like us to interrogate with the section outcome 2 of module 3, let's of course look at the reasons why people resist change. Why is it challenging? I think a very interesting question. Why is it challenging to reduce resistance to change? Because I think you'll agree with me, resistance to change, almost a metaphor that one can use is friction. You need that friction, and you'll see later on with the change implementation process, a very useful tool that we need to use is a force field analysis. And a force field analysis will give us an accurate gauge of the potential friction. So you often have traction versus friction. And to make progress and to make momentum and to create this energy to implement the change, you need both of these ingredients. You need the friction, because the friction is the catalyst. It creates the spark, but you also need the traction. If you don't have that traction, you can't create this critical mass of movement towards achieving the change management goals. And then I'd like to conclude the session by looking at some of the managerial techniques on how to reduce resistance to change. In fact, we're going to quote Cotter's model, and there's six different techniques to reduce managerial resistance to change. And of course, they are significant because we need to apply them at distinctive phases or the stages of the change management cycle. So let's systematically look at the reasons why people resist change. And I think you'll see on the image, sometimes it becomes a bit of a tug of war between management and team members and employees, etc. Shop stewards, often the labor union movement, often very instrumental, and they sometimes provide even heightened levels of resistance. So the good choice of word there is crippling. This could be very detrimental. It could be harmful for the team if we don't, as change leaders, effectively manage the reasons for resistance for change. So I think it's very useful that you would do a root cause analysis. And with the root cause analysis, you'd be able to determine the underlying causes the root causes of resistance to change. I think the biggest mistake that we could make as a change management team is to identify symptoms of the resistance and therefore invest significant strategies and time, effort, and resources in terms of addressing or reducing those symptoms, only to find that maybe 6-9 months into the change management program that you are still struggling to break down these walls to resistance. So I think a lot of it is common sense, and I think a lot of the reasons you'll be able to relate to from your own organizational managerial experience. But let's look at it basically. First of all, I think a lot of us are fearful of the unknown. So I think this fear of uncertainty is sometimes a very paralyzing emotion, and it creates heightened resistance to change. And I think it's very important as a change leader that you're sensitive. We did say it in previous modules, we need to be agile, but we need to create that same sense of urgency, that same agility. We need to build resilience within our team members. We need to be compassionate. We need to be empathic. We have to be sensitive to these fears and not dismissive of these fears. And I think it's very nerve-wracking. It's very daunting and intimidating for a lot of us as we embark on this change. So I think as change leaders, we need to be mindful of this fear of the unknown. Also, a second reason that we can cite is people's self-interest and the perceived threat of self-interest. So we did say in Module 1, the different areas of change. We looked at the SPOTS acronym. And I think one of the common areas of change at organizational level is, of course, structure. And of course, with structural change means that certain managers may be laid off or retrenched. Some managers or even key positions may be declared redundant. And of course, this leads to job shedding. And of course, even to save people's jobs, organizations might downgrade through the job analysis process, job evaluation. They might downgrade jobs, they might demote people. And of course, this creates a lot of fear and anxiety that people will feel that previously I was a manager in the previous organizational structure, and now with the regrading process, I'm now a team leader. And of course, this has not only ego issues, but also in terms of people's productivity, their motivation, their performance. So there's many people management issues that could be negatively affected because of this perceived threat of maybe a loss in terms of self-interest, etc. Another main reason, and we did cite this with Module 1 when we looked at the ProSci research as to what are the critical success factors, what are the primary challenges, what are some of these stumbling blocks to change. And I think trust and understanding certainly stood out. And we did talk about the trust equation. We spoke about Covey's metaphor, the emotional bank account, which is a degree of trust in any kind of working relationship. And of course, this is very important. People need to understand the why. They need to understand the roadmap, the processes as they embark on this change journey. And of course, we know in a crisis, there's a lot of major upheaval. There's a lot of uncertainty. In fact, there's a lot of change management noise. There's a lot of clutter. And I think the key here for a change leader is the ability to stay focused and to be able to cut through all of this noise, to decipher and to crack the code of uncertainty, and of course help and assist people, provide them with a safety net. We said that during the change transition cycle, the emotional and psychological states that employees move through during times of change. So I think trust is always going to be the cornerstone of any winning change strategy, and instilling a sense of trust is very important. We spoke about that as well, looking at building your credibility as a leader, the integrity formula that we spoke about, integrity plus expertise equals credibility. So I think that's very important. Even applying Aristotle's rhetorical triangle, ethos, pathos, and logos, and not just relying on the business case, the facts and the figures, the financial bottom line, to kind of convince people that they need to buy into change. We need to also talk to their hearts. We need to look at the pathos, which is very important. And ourselves as change leaders, we need to really work on enhancing our levels of credibility, because I think that's your most important asset as a change leader, your credibility. If you lose that, I think it's a real negative in terms of your leadership balance sheet. Also, we said it, the type O and the type D, in particular the moderate to the high type D individuals, they will tend to exhibit a high kind of risk aversion, and their tolerance to change and ambiguity will be quite low. And of course, this creates many, not just individual, team, but also business unit and ultimately organizational barriers to implementing and adopting the change. There's also a general category that I've included on the slide, and you'll see this could include a whole host of different factors. Organizational culture, probably at the top of the list there. People we know often get caught up in their comfort zone, and I'll put up an image very shortly. I think you've probably seen it on the internet. It's gone a bit viral. Absolutely love the image, and it just amplifies the fact that a lot of us find ourselves in a comfort zone, and we need to guard against that. The timing of change. Sometimes change is a good idea. It makes a lot of business sense, but the timing is all wrong. And I think there's many articles and case studies to indicate this. Very good article. I think we know the cell phone company Nokia, who at some point in the 1990s was a global market leader, absolutely dominating the market share, the global market share. And if you just Google this, and you'll find the article, The Rise and Demise of Nokia. And I think it just shows you that the timing of change was all wrong. And also, we're going to look at case study 2 with the next module. You'll see timing is a very important factor, which I think sometimes change leadership teams underestimate. I think it's something that has to be seriously factored in to the change decision. Also, peer pressure. You often have, both internally and externally, you have very influential key decision makers, and sometimes the pressure that they put on leads us to falsely implement change. And I think there's a whole host of factors. So when we get to learning activity 7, you'll see this is one of the activities that I'd like you to tackle, and I think it's going to be a very useful exercise to give you some change leadership intelligence as to what the specific reasons are. What I've just given you are generic, but I'd like you to localize it to your specific organization and provide then the company specific reasons for resisting change. And of course, you're welcome to refer to recent change programs and projects. So this is the image that I spoke about, and I'm sure you've seen it on the internet. Absolutely love it. So you'll see we often find ourselves in a comfort zone, and the much larger circle there is this is where the magic happens. So it's almost like taking a leap of faith, and I think it's very important then as change leaders to somehow thrust people out of their comfort zone and try to get that critical mass, the majority of the team and business and ultimately the organization, to embrace the change. And I think another image that you may be very familiar with is, of course, the 4 developmental zones. And I think you'll see it's the comfort zone, then the fear zone. And I think this is very important, that we're able to assist people beyond the comfort zone, beyond the fear zone, to break through that threshold and then ultimately get them to the 3rd and the 4th zone. And that's, of course, the learning zone, which is zone 3. Once we get to the learning zone, we did say it earlier on, one of the critical success factors of a change-capable organization, we covered this with module 1, is then, of course, to create a high-impact learning organizational culture. That is a critical success factor. That's very important that we do that. And of course, the 4th and final zone, the pinnacle, is of course the growth zone. So we did mention this. I think change leaders need to have a growth mindset. We need to have an investment mindset. We need to have an abundance mindset. And we need to be talent liberators. We need to shine a light on the most talented people in our team. The worst thing I think you can do as a change leader is to somehow suppress or to hoard the talent. I think try to be a talent scout, talent spotter, and ultimately a talent liberator. Try to release the talent as best as possible, and of course try to harness and capitalize on the wealth of talent, the treasure trove of talent that you have in your organization. So somehow try to navigate your team from this comfort zone through the fear zone, getting to the learning zone. I think that is typical of stage 3, the transitional cycle. That is that exploration, that experimentation, that curiosity. Try to get your team members there as quickly as possible, and then to continue the upward escalation to the most sophisticated developmental zone, and that's, of course, the growth zone. So the million-dollar question, why is it so challenging to reduce resistance to change? And I think, again, from Module 1 and a related learning activity, I did ask the question, how many of the different areas, the 5 areas of change are currently occurring in your organization? And also a secondary question was then to say, well, which of these is the most challenging? I think we'll come to the same conclusion, that it's probably people. So unlike technology, which doesn't talk back, people do talk back. And human beings are very complicated. There is thinking, there's attitudes, there's perceptions, there's expectations. And of course, this creates a vortex of sometimes negative emotions. And this could be very challenging for any change leadership team. So I think it's very clear, this is why it becomes so challenging. Technology can be programmed to automatically update or change. We set culture, which is an accumulation of people's thinking and values and attitudes and expectations, etc., probably the most difficult to change. Organizational structure also straightforward. Organizational design specialists will take the lead there, and of course it makes it very challenging the moment that you have to introduce the new structure to the organization. Also, people are very independent. We've got a free will, and I think this makes it very difficult for organizations to successfully implement change. They have very personalized and subjective views of change. Like we said, one of the reasons for resisting change is, of course, self-interest. And of course, if people cannot see it, I did mention this early on in this program, WIIFM, the most frequently listened to radio station in the world, what's in it for me? If people cannot see the immediate, the short-term, and the medium-term benefits of implementing change, it becomes a very hard sell for a change leadership team. Also, we said it's a critical success factor, and I think it reaffirms what we've said with previous modules. Module 1 and 2 is that we need to consult, we need to engage, we need to involve people, the team members, as much as possible in the entire change management processes. Key decisions, the change processes, the strategies should not be taken unilaterally. We need to have a democratic process. Employee voice is very important, and some are stimulating and encouraging this. And I think we said it earlier on in this program as well, that we have to create the sense of ownership, sense of urgency. And as leaders, we are the advocates of change. We need to create that sense of ownership amongst our teams so that they can be responsible and responsive when it comes to implementing change. So we can almost quantify the formula for change, and we can look at this as a way of trying to mitigate or minimize the potential resistance to change. So you'll see this is the change formula, and it comprises of 4 variables. And the formula reads as follows: D multiplied by V multiplied by F must be greater than R. So what do these symbols mean? Firstly, D is a dissatisfaction with how things are right now. So there must be a very strong drive towards change. Like we said with the force field analysis, the driving forces. So we've got to critically evaluate the status quo, and we've got to come to conclusion that the status quo is no longer adequate. And if there's a general view and there's a critical mass that support that perception, then I think it becomes one of the driving forces. But in conjunction with this dissatisfaction of the status quo, we also have to have a vision of the future, a vision of what is possible, and it must be a realistic vision. And we did say it with Nosta's module, the the vision is one of the important, in fact, there were 5 variables that were mentioned, and the vision was one of them. I think you'll recall that from module 1. And then, of course, there must be this willingness, this will and conviction to actually activate and to implement the change. That's why we said with the previous module that catalyst leaders are so important. These are the pioneers, these are the mavericks that are not afraid to take calculated risks, that can initiate and create this impetus that can build the momentum for change. So collectively, these 3 factors, the dissatisfaction of the status quo, the vision of the possible future, and also making sure that we are willing to take the first steps, this must always be greater than the potential resistance to change. So it's almost like a scale, and you have to put these variables on the scale. Think on the resistance side, it's very clear. We've covered that. We looked at some of the generic reasons why employees and team members resist change. We're mindful of that. And we have to contrast that. We have to weigh that up against these 3 other factors. And if these factors are not great, if they don't outweigh the potential reasons for resisting change, then I'm afraid to say my advice would be don't proceed with the implementation of a change management project. So in light of this, what I would like you to do, and again, please refer to workbook 3, I'd like you to tackle just one question with regards to learning activity 7, and that is to look at the 5 foremost reasons. I think we can cap it at 5. What are the 5 primary or foremost reasons why employees resist change in your organizations? So I've given you a table in the workbook, and what I would like you to do is to populate that table. It's a 2-column table, very straightforward. List the 5 factors, the reasons why you think people resist organization. You're welcome to do a bit of a survey, a mini survey within your team, within your business unit, just to test the water, so to speak, and get insight into from current and past experience, what are the primary reasons? And then what I'd like you to do is to match each of those reasons, those factors, with a strategy that you can implement as a change leader to resist that particular reason, thereby breaking down those walls of resistance to change. And as far as possible, I'd like you to give practical work-related examples, just to emphasize your reasons and your strategies, etc. And again, similar to the previous modules, if you could drop me an email, I've given you my email address, you could email 7.1 as part of learning activity 7. If you could email this to me, again, I think it'll be a 1-pager, just listing the reasons in column 1 and column 2, just giving me your strategies. I'd be very interested, and I'd definitely give you some feedback as to whether I believe those are viable, feasible, and also sustainable change management strategies.
This is Charles Cotter signing out. I'd like to thank you for watching the video clip, Change Management and Leadership in a Crisis online learning program. Please be on the lookout for subsequent uploads on my YouTube learning channel of the other modules. Also, please have a look at the chat box section. You'll see in the comment section. If you'd like to access a copy of the workbook in PDF format, I'll gladly email that to you for this specific module, but also the other modules of the various video clips. I'd also like to remind you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please press the notification bell to be alerted of the subsequent uploads of the other modules, and also like to encourage you to reach out and contact me. My contact details and social media presence will be provided on the screen very shortly, so I'd encourage you to reach out, and of course I would welcome any sort of communication or feedback regarding this video clip or any other learning content on my YouTube learning channel. Thank you. I appreciate your ongoing interest and active social media support. Thank you. You keep well. Bye-bye.